Every so often you see an idea or a concept in a game that everyone is convinced will completely shift the industry in a certain direction that almost always ends up failing to make such an impact. Take Shadow of Mordor for instance. Back in 2014, everyone was talking about how revolutionary the Nemesis system was and how this was the feature you'd see in every game going forward. 5 years later, and we have a disappointing sequel and what feels like a totally inconsequential iteration of the concept in the latest Assassin's Creed, and that's kind of it. Safe to say the system didn't shake things up the way many thought it would. Similarly, I believe SUPERHOT should have changed a lot of things, but outside of what you could loosely term its franchise, the innovations 2016's release brought to the genres of first-person shooters, action titles, have gone largely unexplored by other games, which is a real shame because the things that SUPERHOT ends up doing, the lessons it potentially has to teach in terms of design, go far beyond what you see on the surface level. See, SUPERHOT's identity is defined by one delightfully simple gimmick, but is also illustrative of the ripple effect such a change can have on every minute element of a genre framework. If you were to speed SUPERHOT up to a more regular tempo, in terms of its systems or rule sets, there isn't much outside of its look to set it apart from other shooters. You might say that it was slightly more challenging given that you go down in one hit, but the core principles are largely the same. You shoot enemies while avoiding getting shot yourself, you pick up enemy weapons, etc. But by slowing things down, you begin to notice something interesting. A threat that would otherwise come and go in an instant, a bullet, a hail of automatic gunfire, now sees that threat linger, compounding on itself the more bullets appear. A burst of rounds isn't merely something to take cover from, a singular event to wait out until the enemy has to reload, it's now a flurry of individual enemies unto themselves, each one requiring careful consideration to avoid, as more bullets means less screen space for you to work with, and more time spent thinking rather than doing means more bullets. It's not out with the realms of possibility that you could successfully dodge a projectile only to find yourself right back in that same path once more. Suddenly, what other games might consider a necessary but insignificant byproduct of a genre focused on guns serves an entirely different purpose here and arguably poses a much greater threat. And with that in mind, despite its reduced speed relative to other shooters, to call SUPERHOT a slow game feels inaccurate. If anything, you're having to worry about far more at once. It's infinitely more frenetic than many of its contemporaries. But thankfully, you're given an immensely broad range of options with which to navigate each level, and they are cool as hell. The game's slow motion means you don't need to look too hard to see the influence of gun-fu cinema on full show. You can block bullets with your own bullets, cut them in half, bombard your enemy with thrown objects, dive out from behind a corner and pop every enemy as if you're in hard-boiled, almost anything you can think of. And it's all bolstered by ingenious aesthetic design that's as utilitarian as it is uniquely stylish, with its striking colour palette and lack of potentially distracting UI giving you all the visual information on enemies you'd need, while also requiring you to intuit things like ammo count, forcing you to quickly react when you hear that ominous click from your empty gun. Thanks to each weapon's limited ammo count, you're encouraged to move into the fray as opposed to cowering away from it, so that you might more easily grab an enemy's weapon to continue your rampage. The game wants to wring as much intensity and excitement out of every slight movement that it possibly can, and uses every tool at its disposal to do so. There's no scoring meter a la Bulletstorm or even Devil May Cry. A good deal of my choices to do cool stuff in SUPERHOT, as well as others judging by what I've seen of the game's VR component, come down purely to the fact that it looks cool. As a result of the mechanical flexibility you're afforded, every encounter plays out slightly differently, and if you're anything like me, you'll find yourself saving a whole lot of the end of level replays because each one represents its own little narrative, entirely driven by your moment-to-moment decisions. SUPERHOT takes you from passive audience member watching set pieces unfold around you and places you firmly in the role of director/stunt guy. Of course, your actions do serve multiple purposes besides just looking cool. For example, the act of lining up a shot, then turning away and trusting you'll hit your mark typifies that Hollywood action hero nonchalance, as someone will casually walk away from an explosion, for example, but this faith in your own abilities is also a requirement in a lot of cases. As enemies swarm from all directions and your screen is awash with bullet trails, you always have to be thinking one move ahead, weighing up the risks of spray and praying versus the time you'll spend waiting to ensure that bullet connected with your target. Other techniques, like the aforementioned slicing bullets in half, were things I found myself doing just to toy with enemies more than I did for any kind of tactical advantage. That said, the fact that the game doesn't overtly explicitly tell you that you can do this makes the process of noticing that little glow as the bullet whizzes by your cursor and figuring out the extent of your abilities, or the times where you turn around and instinctually save yourself from an onslaught of lead, all the more satisfying. And the result of the game's slow motion is that it allows SUPERHOT to straddle the best of all worlds. Here, tense tactical play isn't any less visceral or action focused. It still involves brutally tearing through your enemies. It's just that SUPERHOT gives you the chance to luxuriate in the resulting shards. The one thing I would say the game fails to follow through on is the story meant to join it all together, taking the amusing totalitarian Max Headroom vibe they established in the short but sweet 2013 prototype, and attempting to expand on it, seemingly without knowing where to go, setting up a charming DOS look for its menus, but using it to push a half-baked meta-narrative that plays directly against the strengths of its design for seemingly no reason. Where the gameplay so effectively allows you to craft and control your own wild combat stories through mechanics that encourage experimentation, the story repeatedly halts the flow of its levels dead in order to lock you in a room and remind you that you aren't in control, I guess? It's a reminder that just because your story draws attention to the way it's delivered doesn't make it inherently smart. It's entirely at odds with your interactions here, which is disappointing for just how cohesively every other element of SUPERHOT comes together. It was a similar deal in the aforementioned Assassin's Creed Odyssey and how it tried to imitate the Nemesis system. The component pieces were present, it was just that you had bounty hunters serving one purpose and your recruits serving an entirely different purpose, where in Mordor they were one and the same, allowing you to control the orc hierarchy with your recruits. It meant that Odyssey failed to capture the distinctly Machiavellian mischief Mordor allowed you to carry out. It wasn't just the mechanics or the gimmick, it was the complementary nature of every element in totality that made the system as innovative as it was. Likewise, the point I'm making in this video isn't that more shooters should arbitrarily be in slow motion, it's that, as further evidenced by SUPERHOT's bonus modes that change one or two rules and subsequently feel like playing entirely different games, one simple tweak to the formula acts as a jumping off point for SUPERHOT to pull apart every little aspect we've come to know from its genre, making for more mechanically and visually gratifying moments than its more passive, quote-unquote cinematic peers. If SUPERHOT can make us view something as seemingly insignificant as bullets in a totally new and exciting light, imagine what a similarly interrogative mindset could do for wheels in racing games or blood in survival horror, for example. SUPERHOT shows us that real innovation is often in the details staring us directly in the face, and that in order to find that innovation, sometimes the best approach is to take a step back and slow down a little. So I hope you enjoyed my piece on SUPERHOT. If you did and would like to support the show directly in return for various rewards, you can always head to my Patreon like the wonderful folk currently on screen. Your support is absolutely what allows me to keep doing the work I do, and I cannot thank you enough for your generosity. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Rob, Nico Blakely, Sivas, Artyom Vitsyuk, Malemonides the Unwise, Dallas Keen, Spencer I Rule It Games Geller, William Fielder, Ali Al-Muhanna, Timothy Jones, Spike Jones, The Nameless Guy, Chris Wright, Hamigas, Zach Casserly, Samuel Pickens, Tom Nash, Shardfire, Anna Pimentel, Jesse Ryan, Brandon Robinson, Justin's Holderness, Matthew Natchery, Nicholas Ross, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.